Hey guys, this week we are in Matthew 25, 26, and 27 in our year of the Bible through the New Testament, and excited about this. Lots of great things. Matthew 25 kicks off with really something we covered last week in Matthew 24, and that is that we got to be ready. Jesus tells a story about these 10 virgins who are waiting on the groom to come. And as they're waiting, their lamps start to run out of oil. Well, half of them, were wise, were smart, and brought extra oil with them just in case, so that they wouldn't be left behind when the groom did show up, so that they'd be ready if their oil ran out. The other five didn't. And so as they were going to get more oil because they ran out, the groom then comes and they get left out as a result of this. And at the very end of this story, Jesus says these words. He says, "Therefore, be alert, because you don't know either the day or the hour." We already talked about this last week, and so there's no reason to prolong this. But I do want to just say once again, listen, Jesus can come back any minute, and we got to be ready. We got to be alert. We got to be ready for whenever He makes the decision to come back. And part of us being ready, part of us being a people who are ready and who are alert, are us being a people who steward well what we've been given. All right, Jesus goes on right after that to tell a story about a man who goes on a journey. And as he's going on this journey, he entrusts talents to different ones of his servants. He entrusts 5 to 1, 2 to 1, and 1 to another. And when he comes back, he asks them what they've done with what they were given. And the one with 5 has doubled his. The one with 2 has doubled his. The one with 1 did nothing with his. Jesus, or the master, when he shows back up, congratulates the first 2, and the last one he calls wicked and lazy. And so what can we learn about how what does this mean for us in order for us to be alert and be ready and steward well what we've been given? Well, the reality is this: Jesus has ascended to the right hand of the Father, and we don't know when He's coming back, but one of the things He's done is He's given us a job, the Great Commission, to make disciples, and He's given us spiritual gifts to do that with. And when He comes back, He needs to find us doing the job, the Great Commission that He gave us, and He needs to see us using the spiritual gifts that He gave us to accomplish the job that He gave us. The reality is, all of us are given time, we're all given resources, we're all given gifts, and our job is to not compare those things to other people. Our job is to simply be faithful with what we have been given. Jesus is coming back. Jesus is going to hold us accountable for this, but He's not going to hold us accountable for what anybody else does. He's not going to hold the one with 2 talents accountable because he didn't do with his what the man with 5 talents did with his. He's going to simply hold them accountable to whether or not they were faithful and stewarded well what they had been given. And so how are you using what you've been given? How are you using the time you've been given? How are you using the resources you've been given? How are you using the gifts that you've been given? We have to be a people who are ready and alert by stewarding well and being faithful with what we have been given. And then Jesus tells the story about the separation of people, and he talks about it using the language of separating sheep and goats, and someone is right and someone is left. And what was the difference maker according to Jesus? When they're, we don't understand, why are we over here and why are we over here? And he said, I was hungry and you gave me something to eat, or you didn't. I was thirsty and you gave me something to drink, or you didn't. I was a stranger and you took me in, or you didn't. I was naked and you clothed me, or you didn't. I was sick and you took care of me, or you didn't. And I was in prison and you visited me, or you didn't. The reality is, part of us living life for Christ is us being willing to serve other people. He says, what you did for the least of these, you did for me. We have to be willing to serve other people. It matters. We have to serve other people, especially those that are lowly and marginalized and poor. We have to take care of those people. We have to serve other people. So how are you doing at serving other people? And then in Matthew 26, we find this incredible story of Mary coming to anoint the body of Jesus with this alabaster jar of perfume that would have cost a year's wages. And I don't think Mary hesitated doing that. You know why? Mary was willing to give anything for Jesus, was willing to give her best for Jesus because she knew He was worthy of it. And I just want to ask us the question this week: are you willing to give your best for Jesus? Because you should, because He's worthy of it. Let me ask you this. If you were in Mary's place, would you be willing to give an entire year's salary, whatever you make in a year? Would you be willing to give it all up for Jesus because He's worthy of it? Because that's what Mary did. Are we giving God our best? Are we willing to surrender and sacrifice anything for Him because He is worthy of it? And then he goes on in Matthew 26, and we see Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane, and he's praying in the garden. And I love this prayer because Jesus, something we can learn from the prayer of Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane is that Jesus was honest with God, and we should be too. We should tell God how we feel. We should tell God what we're thinking, but ultimately we also have to let God know that it's not about our preference. It's not about our desire. It's not about our will. Ultimately, we are willing to surrender and submit to his desire, his preferences, and his will. We're willing to do that. We're willing to do that because we love him, and we're going to be honest with him and tell him how we feel. Jesus said, I don't want to go through this if I don't have to. But ultimately, God, it's not about what I want. It's about you, what you want. And I just want to ask you today, is that your posture when it comes to a relationship with God? When it comes to Jesus in your life, is your posture one which I'm going to be honest with God, but I'm also going to be willing to put his preference, his desire, his will above my own? And then the last thing I want to touch on in Matthew 27 is what we see the example of Pilate. And Pilate knew Jesus had done nothing wrong. He knew Jesus was innocent. His wife even told him, hey, I was warned in a dream about this man. Don't have anything to do with him, right? But Pilate still handed him over for crucifixion. Why? Because Pilate listened to the voice of the crowd instead of listening to the voice of God. And I just want to say, in our culture today, the crowd is very loud. Culture is very loud. And I'm just asking you, as a follower of Christ in 2025, will I be willing to be bold enough and to be courageous enough to not listen to the crowd, to be willing to go against the culture, to be willing to swim upstream, to be willing to go on the narrow way that is more difficult and that is not popular? You see, we've got to be a people who prioritize one voice and one voice alone. And it's not the voice of the crowd. It's the voice of God. So how are you doing? How are you doing at listening to the voice of God instead of the voice of the crowd? Your willingness to be bold and courageous and listen to God's voice over the voices in the crowd will lead to blessings that are greater than anything you could have ever imagined. I love you guys. We'll see you back here next week for the conclusion of Matthew, and as we begin Mark.